Hello, I'm Clarion from Clarion Call Fiber Arts, and welcome to part 3 of my guide to reclaiming sweaters. In this video, I'll show you how to quickly and easily take apart a pullover sweater. We'll be using the magic thread method I demonstrated in part 2, so if you haven't watched that video yet, I recommend you go do that before we go any further. Go ahead, I'll wait. Are you ready? You'll need a seam ripper for this, and the sweater that you selected using my guide from part 1. Start by turning your sweater inside out so you can get a better idea of how your sweater was assembled. Knowing how it was put together will help you take it apart. Keep in mind, every sweater is a little different, but generally they follow roughly the same rules. Before you head to the seams, you'll want to remove any tags or labels that are sewn into your sweater with your seam ripper, as they will prevent you from pulling your sweater apart smoothly. Most pullover sweaters are comprised of a front piece, a back piece, 2 sleeve pieces, and a collar piece. Generally, the side seams are the best place to start when taking apart your sweater. Remember to inspect both sides of your seam for that little line of V's. Then, head to the end of the seam by the top open part of the V. Usually, on commercially made sweaters, this ends up being the sleeve cuff. Find your magic thread and pull. Sometimes, the magic thread gets caught and doesn't want to pull any further, or it even breaks. If this happens to you, don't worry. You can always locate it again by repeating the steps outlined in part 2, detailing how to find the magic thread. If the magic thread is just a little stuck, try taking hold of both sides of the seam allowance and giving them a gentle tug open. Like all of us, sometimes the magic thread just needs a little encouragement. Once you have both of the side seams open, head for the arm's eye seams. Again, inspect both sides of the seam to locate the line of V's, and once found, start at the end of the seam by the top open part of the V. Find the magic thread and pull. Look at me go, isn't that satisfying? Now, you'll need to repeat these same steps on the other side. Once you have your sleeves completely separated, head to the collar seam. My sweater has this seam binding here, and I'll need to remove that completely before I start looking for V's. As you're seam ripping, be careful to only catch the thread holding the binding to the sweater, as you risk damaging the yarn you're trying to save. And as exciting as seam ripping is, I think I'm just going to go ahead and skip to the end. Once that's done, we can tackle the collar seam. Since the collar is a full circle and it's very difficult to find the end, start wherever you can clearly see the line of V's, and make sure you're going in the right direction. Remember, this is always the open top part of the V. And I know my head's in the way, but all I'm doing is finding the magic thread the same as before and pulling. Collar seams can be very tricky because there's a lot happening here. There's extra yarn from the shoulder seams that can catch you up, and there's also binding yarn from the front and back sweater pieces to work around, so it can be very difficult sometimes to tell what's going on. But don't worry, if you lose the magic thread, you can always find it again. Stay calm, stay focused, don't give up, you can get this collar off, I promise. Once you have the collar separated, the last thing to take apart are the shoulder seams. My shoulder seams have a piece of stabilizing elastic sewn on, and I'll need to remove that before I look for V's. Your sweater might have serging here at the shoulder seams, and if that's the case, I recommend saving yourself the headache and just cutting the serging off. This will cause a small amount of unusable yarn, but trust me, it's worth it. My sweater has a seam here, and I realized while I was seam ripping that as I removed the stabilizing elastic, the seam opened up as well. Less work for me, win-win. Now that you have your sweater broken down into its separate pieces, you can go about unraveling it. This is the top of the sleeve piece. Each sweater piece will have some sort of bind-off at the top, just like if you were to bind off your own piece of hand knitting. You'll need to remove this bind-off before you can go to town on unraveling it. The binding looks like a line of V's as well. Locate the end of the binding next to the open top part of the V and find the magic thread. Once the binding is removed, you can unravel the whole sweater piece as one long strand of yarn. There it goes! This is the back piece of the sweater. You'll need to remove the same binding as before along the shoulders and the center of the neck before you can start unraveling. This is the front piece of the sweater, with the same binding to be removed. Most commercial sweaters are knitted from the bottom up, so to unravel it you need to start at the top of each piece. The rule of V's still applies here, so if you're not sure what end is the top, always check which way the V's are pointing. As always, the open part of the V is the top. You're probably super busy unraveling all your sweater pieces right now, but I have one final tip. Sometimes during unraveling, the reclaimed yarn will have separated into its plies, like this yarn did. This drives me nuts, so I always run my reclaimed yarn through my spinning wheel to reset the twist in the yarn like this. And that makes it like new again. It's so much happier to work with this way. If you do decide to do this though, make sure to soak the yarn in hot water afterwards to set the twist. And that's how you take apart a pullover sweater. If at any time while you're taking apart your sweater you feel in over your head, feel free to visit my Etsy shop where I've done all the work for you. There are many skeins of beautifully colored reclaimed sweater yarn up for grabs there, including the one we worked on today. I'll see you in part 4, where I show you how to take apart an irregularly shaped cardigan sweater. If you liked this video, hit the like button, subscribe to my YouTube channel, or find me on Instagram for more fiber how-tos and experiments. Happy crafting!